Let me just come over here and press play. Okay, this keynote is going to give you a brief history of the situation or conflict in Vietnam, along with the history of the home front. This video can be played multiple times. It can be rewound, fast forward. You can take notes if you want. You don't have to. What you do need to know is that I'm not going to stop during the keynote to ask you questions because we're not going to have any type of discussion here. I'm just going to run through each of the slides and give you the information that you need to have for the exam that will be up and coming. Okay, so the keynote is about Vietnam, the conflict itself, and then also what happened in America during this time period. The first thing that I would like you to know is that control of Vietnam has been divided up by many countries throughout the country's history. But the country that controlled most of Vietnam was France. And the reason that France controlled so much is because that it was really needed the resources that Vietnam was so famous for. Vietnam was well known for its rice paddies. It was well known for its rubber resource and for its tin resource. During World War II, the Japanese controlled the French colony of Indochina, which is present-day Cambodia, Laos, and what is Vietnam. A communist by the name of Ho Chi Minh would fight against the Japanese during this time period. After beating the Japanese, Ho declared Vietnam independence. But what he didn't realize is that the French were not going to have that, and they were not going to surrender that easy. So French would come back, and Ho would spend a great deal of his time fighting off the French. Everything would culminate in the battle, up into the battle called Dien Bien Phu. Alright, it happened in 1954. Dien Bien Phu is this little town in northwestern Vietnam, very close to the Laos border. And what was happening is the Viet Minh, they were running, or the North Vietnamese, they were running supplies back and forth between North Vietnam and Laos. And the French really wanted to stop that, and they felt that if they could get a stronghold on this town of Dien Bien Phu, that they would eventually win and stop Ho and take control over the entire country. The only problem is that the French settled themselves in this bottom of this valley, so that all surrounding the Viet Minh were able to surround them. And basically what happened is, in April of 1954, the Viet Minh led this all-out attack on the French, and the French were beaten. After that, they needed to decide what was going to happen in Vietnam. So a number of diplomats from the US, France, Great Britain, Soviet Union, China, and Vietnam met in Switzerland, Geneva, to decide what to do with splitting up Vietnam. So what was decided was the North would become communist, and their capital would be Hanoi, and in the South it would be non-communist, and it would be Saigon. Now, the United States said that they would keep control, partial control, over South Vietnam, and the only time that they would intervene is if the North moved in on the South. So they were willing, the United States was willing to help Vietnam set up their own government. So in 1959, with American support, Ngo Dinh Diem, took over control of South Vietnam. And that's a picture of him right there. Now, Diem held no elections. He didn't hold any type of elections for any other placements in the government. This made a lot of people in South Vietnam very angry. He also cracked down on the communists in South Vietnam. So he didn't make any friends. So what happened is that the communists in South Vietnam decided to they would set up this National Liberation Front, or the NLF. They would also be called the Viet Cong. Now, more of an American role. Okay, President Eisenhower believed that we needed to control communism all across the world. He believed that if communism were to take over the entire country of Vietnam, that it would be like dominoes, and all the countries in Indochina and Southern Asia would fall along with Vietnam. So what he did is he sent billions of dollars into Vietnam to help aid them. He also would send hundreds of soldiers to act as advisors. What they wanted to do is they really wanted to help the South Vietnamese fend for themselves, to be able to fight for themselves and not need any kind of outside support. I hope everyone is doing all right so far. I know this can be kind of a lot of information. That's why we're giving you the time to kind of go back and rewind and fast forward, whatever you need to do. Okay, the Green Berets. Green Berets were also sent into Vietnam. All right, the Green Berets are they're a form of the United States Army. They're what's called the Special Forces, and what they do is they control 6 primary missions. They have 6 primary missions, and most of the missions are highly classified. But what happened is President Kennedy sent in the Green Berets to also assist the South Vietnamese. Right. Now, they tried very hard to set up a democratic government. They helped Diem, but he limited reforms. And they had no success at all. They were very limited in what they could do. He also took away rights of the Buddhists. Now, the Buddhists would respond by leading protests and silent marches. As you can see in this picture right here, this one Buddhist, to protest the democratic government of Diem, he drove his car into the streets, got out, poured gasoline over himself, and then lit himself on fire to protest what Diem was doing. So people were not happy with Diem. What would eventually would happen is the South Vietnamese army would overthrow the government, and they assassinated Diem. It would not be the only assassination in November. On November 22nd, 1963, while he was being driven down a street in Dallas, JFK was also assassinated. So now 2 presidents who had been working on the situation in Vietnam were gone. So what will we need to do? Right? Lyndon Johnson would take over after Kennedy's death. Right? It is said that Johnson was recorded saying that he had major doubts about the continued fighting in Vietnam. He looked to have congressional support, which came when North Vietnamese patrol boats allegedly attacked American destroyers in the Gulf of Tonkin. This is the story. In August of 1964, American destroyers were making their way around, making their rounds, and they said that they were attacked. They were attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin near North Vietnam. So Congress immediately